Hello, everybody. My name is Rebecca. I'm a school psychologist working in the state of Connecticut, and I'm really excited today to be able to speak to Dr. Jason Pedersen. He is both a nationally certified school psychologist and a Pennsylvania certified school psychologist. Jason received his PhD in school psychology in 2002 from Penn State University. He's currently employed as a school psychologist by the Derry Township School District in Hershey, Pennsylvania. He's been involved in RTI and MTSS since 2002. He has co-authored on data analysis, team building, and best practices. He is a past president of the Association of School Psychologists of Pennsylvania, and he is the current NASP delegate for Pennsylvania. Jason, thank you so much for being with me today. It's so exciting to speak to you about your recent column in the Communication Matters section. Can you tell us a little bit about your initiative, how you got started, how you came up with these ideas and thoughts, and where did you begin?
Sure. Well, thank you for having me, Rebecca. This is a great privilege to do this. Probably where we began is where we always begin, is that, as we jokingly tell our interns, is that every problem that you encounter is actually an opportunity just waiting to be uncovered. And we've sort of lived by that motto here for years. And so often the catalyst was something happening. And in this case, for us, it was a combination of factors. If you go back in time that far, No Child Left Behind had recently been passed, and then people were thinking about how do they react to those requirements, those big assessment requirements. And that it was sort of a confluence of events. So we had that happening at around the same time. We were noticing trends in our reading data in terms of the screening that we had started doing in response to No Child Left Behind that were showing us that their students were struggling. Mm-hmm. So that kind of got us going, was saying, well, what's going on? We see these problems are occurring. What can we do to address that? Because the problem had presented, and we were trying to figure out how to manage that.
Yeah. And so back then, was your school using a model, a different system for identifying kids and levels of support?
Absolutely. Back then, it was the instructional support team model. So essentially, child study team, all of that process. We went individual child by individual child by individual child. And if a teacher had a concern, it came up, and that you just sort of addressed it one child at a time. And our thinking on it at the time was that that was, and still to this day is our thinking on it, is that's an extraordinarily inefficient service delivery model. So we were thinking, how do we cast the widest net so that way we can capture as many kids accurately who are at risk, and then figure out how to support them moving forward. And that was the big push that we decided to try to go for, was how do we make sure that we are catching as many kids as possible and moving them forward.
Yeah. So what did you find as you started out on that process were the biggest challenges and barriers to the work, and how did you overcome them?
Sure. Some of the biggest challenges initially, and this won't come as a surprise to any school psychologist, is having people understand what the data means. So, we as good school psychologists, we like to collect data. So we had gotten data on all of the students in terms of the readings. Back then it was just K through 3, and then over time it evolved to K through 5, and then all the way up K through 12. Essentially, we have reading data on that. We were gathering that data, and so we would share, and we did curriculum-based measurement. And so we were sharing those data with staff initially, and I sort of naively, I guess, thought, oh, this is obvious. Can't you see what these scores mean? And found that was not the case. And so it required a lot of time and energy to educate teachers as well as administrators as to what it meant and what it told us and what it could tell us about what we were doing and how our programs were currently working.
Yeah. That makes so much sense to me. And so it sounds like such a daunting task to try to find the time and to get in front of all of these people and get that sense of we can address these challenges. How did you identify and bring on allies? Who were the people that were on your team that helped?
Yeah. Well, it was there were several school psychologists, but what we decided was it couldn't just be us, couldn't just be our show, as we jokingly say. So we started looking around, as we call it, for the coalition of the willing, that seemed open to the idea of doing something different, whether it be classroom teachers, or building administrators or principals. We spent a lot of time trying to engage the principals. I'll highlight them sort of first, because and when you're looking at buildings in terms of day-to-day functioning, day-to-day processes, day-to-day expectations, they're the drivers of that force, and they're the ones holding people accountable and moving them in that direction. So we felt it was important to get their buy-in and help them understand, and then also find teachers who were willing to help do the interventions. And in part, when you're looking at the administrators, it's, as we jokingly say, it's finding their love language. And oftentimes for administrators, it's about the accountability is it was historically and continues to be a big issue. So we were talking to them about, yes, you're on the hook, you're being held accountable for everybody's performance. And right now we're just sort of inundated with individual referrals and trying to figure out what to do with kid by kid by kid. And we're not really getting ahead of it. We're always rocked back on our heels, being very reactive. So if you want to do better from your accountability point of view, we need to get off our heels and do something more proactive. So for example, we can know who's at risk for not doing well on your high stakes tests earlier by doing these assessments. And if we know who they are earlier, we have the opportunity to intervene, which means they'll do better. And it's the way we kind of sold it was, look, they'll do better on the high stakes tests if we do a better job teaching them reading, if we know who's struggling. So if we teach them better how to read, how to do math and behaviorally, all those other things, the test will take care of itself. But we can't wait till the first, like 2 months before the test is administered to do something. We need to start a lot earlier. It's like turning the Queen Mary. You can't do it on a dime. You have to start a lot earlier, take a longer view, and then what do you plan to make sure that down the road you're getting the biggest bang for your buck? So that was kind of how we talked to the administrators about it and tried to help them see that this is a lot of upfront work that will pay off, maybe not in the next 6 months. You'll see some improvement, but for years to come, you'll see more and more improvement.
I love that, and I just think that is a great metaphor. The love languages. You know, how can I help? How can I help you? And with our separate but agreeing goals, we can really make some powerful changes in both of our trajectories. I love that. And my love language is, I think, gifts. So just so that everybody knows out there. How were you measuring the success as you went along? So I'm sure you got the sense that you spoke to the stakeholders, you got everybody committed and involved. So that was a somewhat of a measure of initial success. How did you go on to continue measuring success, and how were you reporting out the results? And were you always bringing it back to the team of administrators or in teacher faculty meetings? How did that process go?
Right. It was, we try to be as transparent as possible and always have had. So every time we do any kind of benchmark assessment, I'll share a little bit of a funny story. We kind of initially made a couple of missteps, not surprisingly. Is initially, when we did our universal screening, we would share the individual classroom teachers' data just with them. And so they each had their own data. And what we found was it ended up being rather inefficient and problematic, because then they only sort of focused on the kids that they had and didn't care and ignored everybody else on the grade level, which just makes sense. They're worried about their kids, as they call them. So what we had to do was we had to change the concept of your kids, my kids, to our kids. So we early on realized that we had to share all the data with everybody in a grade level, so that way they had a context. So they couldn't say that, oh, okay, while I think this child is struggling, in the relative scheme of the grade level, they're actually not that bad off. Mm-hmm. Within perhaps my subsample, they may look weaker, but across the whole continuum, they're really not. So it gave folks a perspective that was beyond the classroom of what was right in front of them to see the whole grade level. Similarly, with administrators, we would print off all of our histograms, because, you know, graphically depicting things is always good, because you can talk numbers all day, but it's really, if people can see it, that makes a huge difference. So we had histograms, we had scatter plots, the whole 9 yards, print them off, send them out to all the administrators to give them, so they had them for the buildings, for the grades, for the classes. For the teachers, they would get their entire grade level as well as their classes, so they could see the context, see how they fit, see how it all went together. Because we stole, I think it was maybe who said, when he was talking about the signing of the Declaration of Independence, that if we don't hang together, we will surely hang separately. And so we tried to get that concept that the only way we all do well, the only way that you do well is if we all do well. So we have to take responsibility for everybody. And that actually helped a lot, because at some point along the way, we actually started to get teachers at an elementary level to share kids across classrooms to better intervene. Because if I had a classroom that had one child that was demonstrating a particular area of risk, but you had 4, for me to do an intervention for 1, and you do 1 for 4, because then I'm diluting it. So I would share my child with you, and then you could send some back. So we had people start to swap and share students during these intervention intervals based on needs, which got them to really think about how we do things differently.
That's awesome. It sounds like such a great foundational block for just a positive school culture among the adults, a camaraderie and a collaboration that maybe wasn't there as strongly before.
Yeah, it was what really worked is that teachers and everybody in education, frankly, want to do the best they can for students. Yeah. And sometimes it's helping them figure out that perhaps the way we're doing it isn't the best, or maybe not the most efficient. So is there another way that could be better? And for teachers, to your point earlier about sharing out results, is if I go along with you as long as they see that it's working. And right. So we wanted to demonstrate to say, well, so the nice thing was is we'd share the data with them, but they could also see anecdotally with the students that Johnny, who wasn't reading well in September, all of a sudden now could read. Or we had even, first graders who would say, when we would do our first screening, and a teacher would do it with them and say, Susie told me on the first day when we did the screening that she couldn't read. And now we did the winter benchmark screening, and now she's like tearing up because she can read now. And so those sorts of things, sort of anecdotally, hard to capture, but those are very powerful as well.
Very powerful. Tell me a little bit about how you were linking all these strategies and approaches to existing priorities in the building. Was there a little bit of this culture of collaboration before, and was that an asset to growing it?
Well, it was definitely, because there's always a focus on, in regular education, in school psychology, we ended up spending a lot of time in special education, but within regular education, there's a big push for, and has been for years, for professional learning communities and for, collaboration, and how do we move forward in a positive way. So we're really just trying to capture some of that momentum, and we would look at the school district's vision and the mission statement and talk about what those are, and say these are the priorities as a district that we have identified. These are what it says in our strategic plan about how we're trying to turn out the best learners, the global citizens, or all of those sorts of things, and saying, well, how do we link to that? If we're trying to turn out people who are the best possible people they could be, both behaviorally and academically, then we need to think about what we're doing. Are we really getting there? So we really tried to look at the strategic plan and the mission statement to use those also as catalysts for what can we be doing differently. If we want to achieve those goals and we're not currently, is there a better option? Let's try this. Worst case scenario is we're very data driven. If it's not working, we'll tell you. The data will show that. And if it's not, then we say, okay, we made the wrong call. But we were able to change so many things as a result of that. We were able to change the core reading curriculum, the core reading program, the math, all those things shifted because we were starting to think about this, and we were starting to see the results and see how it linked to what we wanted to do ultimately as a district.
And it's like you read my mind, because I was going to ask you that very question, how this effort was linked to greater leadership. And it sounds like it went from your initial focus on the reading to a full scope of supports for students. Did you continually use different data sources to show that that the MTSS was working well, and or to find areas where you needed to tweak some of your plans? How did you use data, and how did the leadership grow?
Well, those are very different questions. So I'll try to tackle them all as best I can in one response.
Sure.
Leadership grew, and then I'll get back to the data. Part of the leadership was initially for all the data analysis teaming meetings, and for a lot of the aspects of this, the school psychologist took the lead in facilitation and planning and organizing that. As I said, we pulled in the principals, but we were fortunate enough also that our district had added a couple of positions called literacy coaches, which were their jobs are largely to work with the regular education teachers and any interventionists on and doing better reading instruction, better literacy instruction. So what we did is we started to pull those folks in and say, hey, you know what? In these data analysis meetings, it's better that you facilitate them than us, because you're going to be talking to the teachers about what your recommendations are instructionally for them as well. So it probably makes sense for us to be there to help support, get all the data organized for you, to get all these aspects for you, but then to you actually facilitate the meeting, so that way you can talk then about what you want to see different instructionally based on this. So we started to get them involved, and to this day, they're still the main facilitators of all of our data meetings, and we're there as support and adding information and putting that in. The principals are always also at those meetings, because if you're going to make a decision, you need to have the decision makers. Yeah. So it's a requirement. So that's some of our, and all those meetings go on our calendars in August. So the whole year is planned out for those meetings. So we don't leave it to chance. You can't say, oh, I didn't know it was coming up. No, everybody has them blocked out. They're sacrosanct. And so that made it logistically a lot easier. So we shared that. So the principals then were able to talk about what they could do logistically to support. The literacy coaches were able to talk about what we're going to be doing instructionally. We were able to talk about what the data sort of told us about what the kids were doing. And then we also had added, as a result, change positions as folks were retiring and things like that. They sort of changed positions and then created what are intervention specialists. And we chose the name intentionally because we didn't want anybody to feel bound, like math or reading, but they're intervention specialists. So they're folks that have a master's degree, and they often have a reading specialist degree or some other thing like that. They're teachers, and they're the ones who are the primary deliverers of some of our interventions, or had been for years, until we evolved to involve more regular classroom teachers in intervention delivery. So it was sharing among all of those. Study has a piece of it. We're still, as we put it, we're kind of the caretakers of it now, of the whole system. We make sure everything is working the way it's supposed to do, that systems are running, that all of the pieces are moving in the right direction, and they're all organized. But there are big elements of it that we no longer have sole responsibility for, that we've given over to others. And as a result, it's more pervasive. Because if it was just me, for example, running the whole show, and I get hit by a bus, then the system can go away. So we didn't want to have that happen. We wanted to make sure that this was a cultural change and that everybody owned it.
Yeah.
And that's kind of what we worked for, was getting everybody doing that.
That's
so
such a wonderful way to have everyone feel like they're growing as well. Not only that they're contributing and the effort is a group effort, but everybody to push themselves to, take that next step in their own leadership in their specific roles. That's great. Well, Jason, if you had any final words of advice for school psychologists out there who may be watching and are either trying to implement MTSS in their buildings or at different stages of the process, what might some words of wisdom be?
Not to be afraid to invite yourself to the party. We did not. Nobody asked us to do this. Yeah. Nobody said, hey, school psychologist sitting in your office, I have a great idea. Can you go figure out how to do this? It was never the case. It was us seeking out and saying, we see this as being an issue, and this is a solution. So it wasn't just problem admiration. We didn't just say, oh, there's a problem. We said, well, we see this as a problem. Here's a potential solution for it. So we did a lot of research ahead of time, a lot of gathering of information, and a lot of gathering of resources, and then went forward and approached the administrators to say, oh, by the way, here, we'd like to help you address this issue and actualize your vision and do the best for our students along the way. So yeah, get involved with the research, find out what it is, make sure you know what you're doing, have a good basis, and then don't be afraid to invite yourself and to be persistent. Tenacity is a great quality. I know the very first year when we did the data collection, it was, people were like, oh, that's great, whatever. And so we would send them constantly the histograms and then follow up and go, did you have a chance to read it? And they would say, no, I didn't. And then every time we would go out of our way to sort of happen to bump into the administrators, and we would ask questions about, oh, did you see that histogram, by the way, that I sent you? So it was just being persistent, not being annoying, but being persistent about it and tenacious. So.
That's great. That's great advice. Jason, thank you so much for sharing this work with us today. Thank you for chatting with me. And I hope that everyone will check out the Implementing Comprehensive MTSS article in Communication Matters. Thank you for being with us. Bye, everyone.
Thank you, Rebecca.
Bye.